I'm Henrietta Alban.
And I'm John Alban.
And in the next couple of minutes, we'll be talking all things trail running poles. So to kick things off, John, what's your number one reason to use trail poles?
Trail running poles redistributes the workload from your legs to the rest of your body as well. Your legs remain fresher for longer, making it easier to go further. There's also efficiency gains, especially when the ground is rocky or a little bit loose. You've got an extra point of contact, so you can move up through the terrain better.
I also find that using trail poles really helps with your posture. So you're going from being quite bent over when you're, for example, hiking uphill to being more upright. And that can really help with your digestion and also breathing pattern, which is key when you're on the go for many, many hours.
There's also psychological benefits. So when the race is really long, but every time you get to an uphill, you get the poles out and the dynamic really changes about how you're moving. That really helps break that race up and make the race go a little bit quicker and makes it a little bit easier.
So now that we've briefly touched on why to use poles, let's move on to when we'd use poles.
Definitely the longer the race, the more likely I am to take the poles out. Hilly, mountainous races as well, when there's really long, sustained climbs, poles are really going to come in handy.
Yeah, I also find that if you, for example, have a really heavy pack, which you might have in a lot of ultra races these days, when you're carrying liquid, nutrition, mandatory gear, poles really help because they just distribute the load from 2 limbs to 4 limbs.
The length of your trail running pole is really important, and you see a lot of people out there with poles that are either too short or maybe really too long. Having the right length pole is going to make you more efficient, it's going to allow you to have the proper technique, and it's also going to be far more comfortable. So a really good rule of thumb to get the right length pole is if your elbow is at a 90-degree angle when you're holding the pole straight down to the ground, that's ballpark right. You can also take your height and multiply it by 0.68, and that will get you roughly there as well. I'm personally 178 centimeters tall, and I use a 125 centimeter pole.
I find that I fluctuate between 2 different lengths, depending a little bit on the terrain. If it's very steep, I prefer a slightly shorter pole because when I then lift my poles up, I haven't got as far to lift them. Whereas if I'm going up slightly less steep climbs, I prefer a longer pole to make more use of my technique.
So it definitely is a personal preference, and you should try and use different length poles in different types of terrain. But if you go for that 90-degree angle, you're not going to go too far wrong. So once you've chosen the length of your trail running pole, you're going to start thinking about the hand strap. Now this is the basic hand strap. It's just a loop of material attached to the top of the running pole. It's super simple, super minimalistic, and super easy to use. You just put your hand in and then hold on to the pole. So it's great in hot weather because you've not got anything on your hand. It's great for if you're running in really technical terrain because you can really quickly take your hand off the pole and use your hands as required. And it's something I'm looking to use normally if it's just a short trail run or maybe a short race. I just grab these poles and head out the door. I do have 2 systems, but for the longer runs and the longer races, I'm usually using the Trigger Shark strap.
With the Trigger Shark strap, you're actually wearing the strap itself, and then you just simply click it in to the pole, and you can also take it off very easily, which makes it so easy to just switch between modes when you're on the move. By also having your straps attached to your hands like this, you're reducing reliance on grip strength, so your hand fatigue over many, many hours is a lot less compared to using the more basic strap, and I find that makes a massive difference, and that's why this is definitely my preferred option on the go.
Yeah, you've also got a better power transfer from your hand into the pole with that system. And if you're running somewhere where there might be roots or the pole might get a little bit caught, this way you're never going to drop the pole. It's never going to leave your hand because your hand is physically attached to the pole. So it's really nice to use.
And these straps are great in hotter conditions because you're not actually covering your whole hand, and that increases comfort and reduces chafing, which is also massive when you're on the go for many hours. But it is worth mentioning that there's 2 different sizes of these. So I'm the smaller size, and whilst these are great in hot conditions, sometimes it is chillier and you want to opt for more protection for your hands because cold hands is something you definitely don't want when you're on the move. And then you can actually just opt for the gloves with the integrated Trigger Shark strap.
Yeah, these are much lighter than having a glove and then adding the Trigger Shark strap on top of the glove that you're already using, and it makes it easy to take the glove on and off as well because you've got less straps happening. There's also gloves with integrated rain covers, so on windy and wet days you could have that added layer of protection.
But it's really important to try the different options and see what works for you because we all have our own preferences, and whilst John really likes the basic strap, I like these, but definitely on a colder day you want to opt for something like this potentially. essentially. So test them out, see what works for you.
Trail running poles come in 3 different sections, so they're easier to pack away. Assembling them is super easy. Just pull on this piece here, get all the pieces aligned. I normally give them a little wiggle to get them right, and then make sure you hear that click. So you make sure that they're properly assembled. You don't want to put weight on them before you give them a little test, and make sure you hear that click so they're all good and together.
And if you are using, for example, the glove, make sure you put the gloves on before you start assembling your pole, because you don't want to be faffing around with the glove after you've actually got the poles out and you're running along.
To put them away again, there's a little button up here. You click that, compress everything down, pull out the different sections. You've got 1 and you've got 2. And then you can stow them as you wish. When it comes to carrying the poles when you're not using them, there's 2 main options. One being the quiver and the other being the running belt. I actually really like having a running vest and the quiver when I'm running longer distances, because fueling is so much easier having the vest when you're using the poles moving uphill. You're usually moving uphill a little bit slower than you would downhill, so you need to fuel while you're going up, and you're normally climbing for longer periods of time. Running vest with the quiver, super simple to use. Make sure it's undone so the quiver can pivot up a little bit, and then you just slide them in and then do it up again so they don't bounce around. And literally, it's that simple.
Yeah, I really like to use the belt in especially shorter races when you haven't got loads of mandatory gear or nutrition to take along with you. Once your poles are folded up, bring them both together. Then you just spin your belt around. There's normally 2 toggles on the majority of belts nowadays. Ideally, make sure your poles are like aligned, so you haven't got one which is slightly longer than the other one. And then you just slide them into the loops. Again, you can realign them once they're in, as that'll impact how well they sit in the belt. And then you just spin it right back.
So no matter which system you choose to use, I think the most important thing is to practice with it. It can be a little bit harder than it looks, maybe, and you don't want to waste time by standing still to be putting your poles away. So hopefully after some practice sessions, putting your poles in and out, you should be able to be running along whilst you do this, even in technical terrain, being able to get the poles in and out without breaking stride. When it comes to using your trail running poles, most of the techniques are for moving uphill, because that's when we're going to be using the poles the most. There's 3 different techniques, and on most climbs I'm using all 3 techniques depending on how fast I'm moving and how steep the climb might be. But no climb is the same steepness all the way up, so normally I'm cycling through all 3 different techniques and using a little bit of one or the other depending. Definitely some techniques I lean on more towards the back end of a race when I'm more fatigued, and others I might use more towards the beginning of the race when I've got a little bit more energy and I'm moving a little bit faster. First one, alternating, where the poles are moving at the same cadence as your feet. So as your left foot comes forward, so does your right pole, strikes level with or slightly behind your foot at a slight angle, then you press off and come through with the next pole. Second one is the gallop, and that's where you're using a slightly high cadence for when you're moving a little bit faster.
Yeah, and this technique is a bit more advanced, and you're actually striking your pole to the ground every 2nd or 3rd step, and you want to make sure your arms, the movement of your arms is quite minimal and close to your body. So yeah, it's definitely a more fluid movement that you'd use as you're running quicker with poles on probably a bit flatter terrain.
And then the third technique is for normally it's when you're either really tired or it's really steep, and that's the double plant, and that's where you're planting both poles and then taking some steps up to reach the poles again, and then planting the poles again, and then gradually moving up like that.
Yeah, and with that movement, you're definitely engaging your core a lot more than you are, for example, using the gallop or the Nordic walking or alternating technique that we spoke about to begin with.
Yeah, and it's really important to practice all 3 techniques and then be conscious of which one you're using and when. And if there's one you're not using and that you should be trying to use more, you definitely realise that in practice.
And finally, we'd just like to say that we are really fans of using poles, especially in the longer races, and we'll never really do a race that's an ultra race without our poles at hand if it is hilly, steep, mountainous terrain. So be sure to practice using poles, see what works for you, and over time you will probably get on with it.